back to Educational Triage. This week, we're looking at online platforms, the advantages, disadvantages, and whether or not they are truly full of equity and if they work for our alternative education students. So make sure that you hit that subscribe button, make sure that you hit like for further episodes. And before you do any of that, we have to say, hey to Philip Summers.
Aloha. I was just listening to you. I was intrigued. Tell me more.
So, Philip, you taught in a program that was exclusively online learning.
That's right.
And by online learning, we're talking about platforms such as Edgenuity, Odysseyware, Plato. We're not going to talk about any specific one. We're going to speak about them in generalities because they're all pretty much the same as far as when it comes down to how they operate, correct?
Yep, they do. Yeah, the structure's the same. Yeah, okay. It's based on the structures that a school would be based upon. Like, for example, U.S. history, the first unit would be Age of Discovery and exploration. And then the second would be the landing at Jamestown and then the establishment of the colony.
Okay.
So then, yeah.
So the platforms basically, they're just structured primarily the way that a regular classroom would.
Pretty much, yeah.
But they actually overload what they have, don't they? Because it depends on whether or not a teacher or whoever wants to go in one direction and focus in on something else, or especially with time. Because what I've discovered in using them is that, and we've talked about this in previous episodes, there might be like 59 hours worth of material that they want the students to learn, that they need to understand for a semester. Maybe it's more than that.
It might be a little more, but yeah.
Yeah, it might be 68 or 70 hours. But what districts are stating is that they want students to complete every single item successfully that's in there, which is rather punitive, because most, maybe half to 2/3 of that material is not going to be covered in a regular classroom. I mean, there may be allusions to it, but it's not actually covered. And so if they're going to be using it as a credit recovery sort of option, then what they're doing is they're saying, because you refused to listen, you will now suffer those consequences.
Yeah, I'm afraid you're correct. Just for context, maybe some people don't understand this. Excuse me.
Yeah.
The way it works is that the first units like of U.S. history would be, Age of Discovery. And within the Age of Discovery, there would be mention of the expansion, colonialism, some of the people that did it, some of the nations, some of the conflicts. So there's subsections within that. And you're right. It's very laborious. There's a lot of detail to it. And I'm a historian and a history teacher, and I'll tell you, I'm really kind of not good at dates, but I'm good at remembering the story. So, for example, if you're talking about pre-Civil War, well, the Civil War started in 1861, so that tells me that, okay, this going up to, it's around the 1850s something. And it eventually the story becomes so familiar, you go 1857 or something. But you can't approach a subject and what happened on January 3rd, 1857, because that's really difficult. And that's a lot of that information is sort of a narrative of history. And that's what makes it kind of difficult and micro.
So is the curriculum, because I've worked a bit with it, with one specific platform, but I molded it and I still wasn't happy. But are you saying that when the students take the test, because they have to listen to, there's a lecture component and there's some reading and there's the ability for them to do, there's some second language stuff that can be there for students who may not speak English as their first language, so they can
That's
get
true.
some remediation on that side. And there are some ways, I mean, they appear to be incredibly helpful in
Yeah.
many ways, but when a student is tested, because they have to be tested in order to make it through that, what do you call it, that section,
That unit or
that,
yeah,
yeah,
unit section something. Yeah, unit section something
that
weird. I'm not
set of information,
depending on what
that is
programming.
that is pretty much right or wrong, correct? Ex-
Correct. Yeah.
and so they're looking for dates, they're looking for specific eight, they can do multiple choice.
Yeah.
Okay.
And and that's really, thanks for pointing that out. It's a lot. It's a multiple choice, and a lot of the information is very focused in micro. However, I did English as well, and they have to submit essays,
Mm-hmm.
and those essays are actually graded by the program itself, and then I review it and see if I agree with the grade.
Right. And I do know that you can do it so that the teacher themselves can grade that essay
Yeah, it
rather
can be
than,
that it just doesn't even do it.
right, but it's
Yeah,
not the teacher, it's the teacher of credit, the person who is overseeing all of this going on.
that
It's
will. Yeah.
not anybody online who's doing that.
That's
And
correct. It's the teacher saying that, going, here's an essay. Oh, I'm going to read it. What is it? Oh, the program says this is a C plus essay. And I read it and I go, well, that's about right, about a C plus, you know. And so then as a teacher, I'd say, yeah, but I don't like C pluses. So here is it back. You might want to look at phrasing and
X, Y,
structure
and
of the
Z.
saying. Yeah.
But the
But yeah,
other part about the grading of, say, essays is that it's AI that's doing the grading.
something
So
like
an
that's doing
AI
it.
is looking for specific terms, phrases, or whatnots
Exactly.
in order
Yeah.
for that to go through. So
Mhm.
somebody may use something else that may mean the same, may may have the same meaning to them, and they're
Mhm.
explaining it, but it may not come through with the AI.
Yeah, it's the best analogy I think would be if anybody ever tried to research Malcolm X on a filtered computer. The
Okay.
filter will not allow you to get past the X. So doing research on Malcolm X is kind of impossible in some school computers. Used to be. I don't know what it's like now, but some of those firewalls are so tight. Anything with X in it's like forget about it. You ain't gonna see it.
Really?
So yeah, it's kind of a strange approach to it. It's like, wait a minute, there's not everything with the letter X in it. It's like, yeah, pretty much anything with X in it. I'll just read it that way and say you can't see it. But
And
that's
then,
a firewall setting.
but then when you come to the mathematics,
Yeah,
that's pretty cut and dry as well.
I imagine it
But
might be.
it's not going to be there to examine the computation that you made,
Mm-mm.
so that where you may have made an error,
Yeah.
there's, you
Where's
can't
your
go
error
back and
from?
figure out the remediation of that
Right.
unless, so there's,
Science is very pat too.
yeah, but
This
I do know
idea,
that you
what's the
can
cell
do,
contained? La, 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 yeah, yeah.
some labs online. How that works is, but and then they also have some other ideas as to how you can set up the labs, but that would mean that you would have to have a science lab at your disposal for many of them in
Yeah.
order for that to happen.
I
So,
didn't do the science. Now you've got me curious, but yeah.
well, yeah, because you can do online dissections, and there's ways to do it, to
Hmm.
manipulate it, but there's
Hey,
some other structures
yeah,
that need to be in place, I believe. Now, if
I believe you're
somebody's
right.
listening and they're saying, no, 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 you're wrong, let us know. Educationaltriage@gmail.com. Call us out on it. That's what we need.
Yeah, please. Yeah, I because I'm not familiar with it. I did take a sort of a self-paced biology course in junior college, whereby I got a lab, listened to a tape, stop tape, write in your workbook, do the figure, Now go to the lab, check out, packet 1, 2, take it, do the experiment, report the results here. And I loved it. And I did it really rapidly and really well. I could kind of like early in the term, I got it done, and it was self-paced, but there was a lab component to it. You had to do the
Okay.
labs. So I would say if that online learning program had that same component, I'd be all for it because I
Okay.
think hands-on is best.
So here's one of the big advantages, and that's the accessibility and the flexibility.
Yeah, yeah, that is one of
Because
them.
let's say that you're not able to be in class, that you missed an entire semester, it's available to you wherever you are.
Mm-hmm.
As long as, and here's part of the equity component, as long as you have the internet that can handle it, and
Yeah,
secondly, you also have the computer gear.
that we found out during the pandemic. Pretty
Right,
important.
right.
Major obstacle if it isn't there, or if
And
you live in the country.
even if you have a hotspot, there's still going to be some lag, simply
Mm-hmm.
because if there's more than one device that has to hook up to it.
Yeah, it's true.
So,
It's
and if
true.
there's
We
more
have
than one student in the
students. Yeah.
home that needs to be online, or the parents or whoever,
Yeah.
it makes a big difference. Okay, now on personalized learning, teachers can go in and they can skew things around, and they can add, delete, or do whatever.
Sure. Say, for example, some kids made it through the first quarter of a
Mm-hmm.
class. Well, you could start them at the second quarter, or where the second quarter would start in your curriculum, that kind of thing, content wise.
Right. Now,
Well,
let's say that we have a student who, let's say that you're teaching something and a student missed a half a quarter and they have to do the second quarter.
yeah, you can
How
actually
do you know how do
yeah.
you know what they've done?
I would look at the transcript and I would see two things: how much credit they got and in which semester, and that would tell me where they were kind of getting it. And then I would give them the credit, and they would only grant credits at the high school in quarters. So that's the interesting
Right.
thing too. So
But how
generally
would you know
speaking,
what
actually, they have
content
about
was covered? How would you know
well,
what
it's
content was
pretty
covered?
kind of uniform coming from the curriculum that the high school had versus what they structure it like. Like I said,
Mm-hmm.
it's like a textbook: age of discovery, colonialism, westward expansion, those kind of things.
Right.
So you kind of
Right.
know where they're at. It's not exact, of course. When it comes to certain subjects, it's not. Well, even all of them really. There's at certain times of the year, there's certain things that are presented. Generally, grade level appropriate, but say someone's ahead in November, someone's behind in November, that sort of thing. And that's where alternative ed I'd come in. I find out what the kids needed and what they didn't. That was important to
Right.
find
And where
out.
they were.
Yeah, it's like some of the things they're really good at, and they really wanted to do a lot of it. It's like, hey, slow down, because this one thing we really got to focus on. That's an obstacle if you don't do it
Well,
now.
here was my problem, and that's because I was incredibly familiar with all the with the syllabi for just
Yeah,
about every single subject at the high school. So when I was designing curriculum, when I was creating it, and then when I had to look at the online platform, I needed to know where they were, and I would check with the teacher and say, did they make it to this point, or are they still not there? And knowing exactly where they needed to be, and looking at the scope and sequence as well, then I could design and I could eliminate portions of it. But the district was adamant that we not take
yeah,
away anything, even though it would mean that they should be able to receive probably 2 credits for a 1 credit class because of all the material that's covered. It's the same thing as when you and I were talking about credit recovery, and I brought up the fact that one person I met at a conference was talking about how if a student
yeah,
failed a course, the school board determined that that was necessary for that same student to take an entire textbook and they had to complete the entire textbook's worth of information in
Full
order to
disclosure to the
get that
audience.
class.
Tony has suffered from this directly. I think he's mentioned it. He has mentioned it to me. he, he advocated for, what are you talking about? The entire year. And they went, yes, we want you to just give them the course. And you were saying, no, I need to know where they're at. They know they've done some, and you were running into the brick wall. We're not about students here. God darn it. We're about curriculum.
We're about equity while they're trampling on the students. And the
That's
brick
true. Yeah.
wall, the problem with
Yeah.
the brick wall was that I pulled some Houdinis and
Yeah.
I made it through the brick wall because what they don't know doesn't hurt them. So I redesigned everything so that we brought it down, and they were dad berm. I mean, dad gum gonna go in there and they were going to
Yeah.
strip all that away. But I
Yeah.
believe, but what I believe is that I was able to instill some of the virtues and some of the philosophies behind what we were trying to do, because we're trying to take
Yeah.
students who may not have been able to succeed in the class because of language, because of who knows what reasons.
Time.
It could
Yeah.
be family, it could be cultural.
Yeah.
There was some reason why they
Work.
weren't succeeding. And we
Right.
know that if there is a huge learning gap for a student when they get to high school, they're not going to be able to sit in a class because they are going to clown themselves back out so that they don't have to look stupid or fail.
I think the better way to
So,
say it maybe is that we're trying to remove obstacles. We're not
right,
trying to set more up.
we're not trying to have them climb a skyscraper when they only need to go over a small hill.
Correct. It's like, yeah, time is important to everyone and everywhere, and it's as important to them as it's important to us, and that's not cool to say.
And the
Hey,
more relevant structure would be to work with them on the lacking skills and get them up to par so that they could succeed rather than punish them
focus on
behind
what
this.
really needs to be worked with. Yeah,
It's where we actually are able to look at somebody and it it obliterates their mask of wanting equity, because, well, it does. I mean,
yeah, that's true. You're right. You're right. It,
so, and we
yeah,
already know that mostly equity, when they say it in school districts and they say we're doing everything equitably and we are working for those students, well, why do we have schools that are lacking in huge resources, and why do those always seem to be in the poorer neighborhoods, and why do they have more students of color in them? So where's the equity in that? If it was equitable, then all students would be getting the same thing. In fact, you might actually give more to those that are lacking so that they can be able to have the same outcomes that you like to talk about as those other schools on the other side of the tracks.
I agree. Don't blame the victims when the system's set up
Well,
inequitably.
they don't blame the victims. They like to show them for photo ops and then they trample them as they run out the door. I mean, I can't think of any other way to put it. So now, when we talk about credit recovery and remediation, how are you going to teach somebody how to read? How are you going to do basic mathematics with somebody on a computer program when it's very nuanced, isn't it? I mean, I know that trying to teach students how to read, I'm not going to say I'm the best one, but it's better to have a one-on-one session with somebody to teach them how to read in an isolated setting rather than have them in front of a computer trying to learn how to read. I mean, you could use it maybe as reinforcement or
Yeah, I'm not
enrichment.
sure because the programs we're talking about are secondary education. So there's an assumption that
You still have students who can't read.
I know. And so now I'm thinking, oh, they're useless. But I don't know of any that would teach a kid to read.
or do
I know that,
basic math.
yeah, I mean, they're assuming that you have a certain level. And so below that certain level, there's no accommodation
Mm-hmm.
with those programs. I don't know of them. I never, there were tools to use. There were things to help them organize. Lots of gadgets that told them how far they'd been and what their grade was so far, but nothing to teach them the basics.
And also, when you have students who come in from other countries and they come in, I had a student who hadn't been in school since third grade, and he came up and he was 18 years old, couldn't read or write.
Yeah.
They asked me to take him on. I said, sure. They said, he's a really smart kid. I said, that's fine. I sat down with him, great guy. Problem. He had to work full time. In fact, he was working two jobs,
Yeah.
didn't have money. I mean, didn't have the ability to know that if he was at school, I'm saying that wrong. He was really smart, except his survival skills overpowered his scholastic skills.
That's well put. I met a bunch of kids like that.
He had to work. His mother brought him up so that he could pay the rent for her. She hadn't seen him in 16 years, but she had him come up because he could work hard. And so he did. He worked two jobs, paying the rent, the food, the bills, because she didn't want to work. But this was cultural. And then he kept telling me, I'm really sorry. I'm really sorry. He would call me. I can't make it in. And finally I said, I can't have you in the program until you're ready because your spot is taking somebody else's spot. And I need somebody who can be here. And I have businesses who want to work with you that could train you to take you to another level, but you're never here.
Yeah, you won't start the
And
journey. I can't do that for you.
right. And so it brings, I have empathy for that because my father, in many ways, was in the same kind of boat where he worked. My father worked throughout his life. He was in foster homes. He made it through so much of his life so that when he was finally, he made it to university,
Mm-hmm.
but he had to work in order to survive. And so that became his number one priority was survival. University was secondary. He still did very well, but these students are in the same boat. And as you've said before, we keep applying the normative middle class values to all
Yes.
these students and
Yeah.
expect them to be there. While it
Yeah.
would be nice for them to make it there, we have to look at who they are, where they are, and how do we take them from where they are, which is alternative education,
Mm-hmm.
and give them a hand so that they can start making their way up. We're not going to pick them up, we're going
Right.
to help them up.
It's
And
not
yes, they
ideal.
want to come up, but
Yeah.
there's a morass of all kinds of crap that they have to make it through many
It's not
times.
wrong. It's just different.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the thing. I had one student who wanted to finish high school, and his boss would never let him come to school. And I was accommodating him with a
Mm-hmm.
pretty good schedule and keeping him fed with work really well. He's working like a crazy man. So I finally called his boss. I said, "Hi, you really need him to finish this." And I talked to him about how it works, and then he understood. He goes, "Oh, okay. He's a great worker." I said, "Yes, he is, but he'll be even more valuable to you with his high school diploma." And that's what we're working with. That now the online stuff might help in this case. You got
Right.
a kid who, you're going to remove obstacles. You just have to make sure they're proficient. You don't just rubber stamp their knowledge and go, oh, yeah, well, even, they're 19, so they should be at high school level. You got to make sure. But you would want to like streamline a little bit maybe there.
Let me ask
That's a good use of it.
let me ask another question on that though. In
Yeah.
a situation like this, why couldn't we have a designed curriculum on classroom? Wouldn't that be a lot cheaper? It would already have what the student needed,
Yeah.
and
Well,
it was already accommodating. We don't have to have an extra bill. We don't have to go through all these extra steps. Is that because the district perhaps does not does not believe in the autonomy, or they don't trust that teachers are good enough to be able to do something like that in order to accommodate children? Is
you're right. Well, of course, if you go in classroom, you're going to create the curriculum. You're a teacher. That's what you do.
You already have the
Uh,
curriculum.
yeah, yeah. So you get it on classroom, and then it's cheaper because you're already paying me to do it. But there is that aspect. You're right. You may be right. They don't. I've noticed that the uniformity of curriculum is taking priority over everything anymore, and I don't know
and
why that is.
and the odd thing is that it's becoming far more popular, and in many of the articles that I've been reading and the people that I've been talking to, they're now saying it's not teacher a teacher attraction problem, it's a teacher retention problem. How are they keeping
Yeah,
the teachers
yeah.
rather than, well, there is a teacher shortage, but
Yes, there
that's
is
but it's getting worse because they can't keep the teachers. If
because they're
you were
not
able to
teachers.
keep the teachers and you were able to allow them to actually teach and quit layering on extra responsibilities, this would be a teaching responsibility. Working out the mental, having to do mental health structures for students, as opposed to having PE and arts and other outlets for them where they were actually doing more socializing and having more social events where they aren't being quite so siloed in a sense on their computers and
Oh, they're
away,
being siloed.
and having even fewer social interactions, unless this is designed for
Yeah.
them to be in these weird places.
Hmm.
I would say that this lends itself to more mental health issues because we
Oh,
already
yeah.
know that to the amount of time that they spent on computers at that time and the amount that they spend, it's just not healthy. So, but if they're working on a classroom
Hmm.
and they're kind of going through everything, it lends itself to being a lot more different because then you can have more social interactions
Yeah.
depending on the teacher and depending on what they're
It
doing.
reminds me of the joke. It's actual reality, which is much better than virtual reality.
Right.
It's true. Yeah.
Because if my teacher does something like a flipped classroom or has a series of lectures
Hmm.
from which I can listen and then do the performative piece
Yeah.
on classroom, and I can go back to those, and then if I have questions I can get feedback from the teacher and we can discuss it.
You could even do personal things. For example, when I would substitute fifth grade, it's perfect sweet spot. I had a bunch of fidget toys, and when the kids would start fidgeting, I'd go, "Okay, time out here. I got some stuff here, so I'm going to pass it out. Take care of it. No, do this. Don't do this. Let's do this, and then we'll move on with the lesson." And they really loved it, and they rarely fought over the stuff. I brought enough for everyone to be, appealed. And I thought, okay, so if you're doing the curriculum, even if you're doing it remotely or in classroom, you can still interact with your students by giving them like a fidget toy or having that interaction going, okay, today, with your assignments is included a fidget toy. That's yours. You keep that. And so you still got that connection whereby if you go with one of the platforms, that recorded lecture has come and gone as far as a human being goes. Once you click off of them, they cease to exist. You don't know who that person really is. And then that's a big deal because you don't have that commitment. When it's a pat class, there's no way to go, whoa, I know something about this speaker. you know nothing about those speakers. They're just people who are speaking.
And if you have a clarification that
Oh
you
yeah.
need, how
Oh,
are you
you
going to
don't get
ask that
it.
clarification?
Yeah, well, that's what we were for as teachers, but that wasn't near enough for me to do. If you want, because no one would ask me for clarifications. Really, I would have loved it. In fact, when they did, I kind of enjoyed it a lot. But yeah, they wouldn't. And that I don't. I like to teach. I don't like to accommodate. And when I was doing the online, it was a lot of accommodation. You know, you do this program, do that program. I'm here to instruct you. Yeah, it felt kind of unused and non-needed.
And see, I had a student in the past who needed to do a credit recovery in PE. And I wasn't doing, at that time, I
Yeah.
was doing academic therapy. And she would come in and she'd look at me and say, "Can you help me with my PE class?" I'd say, "What do you mean, help you with your PE class?"
Yeah.
She didn't have to do anything physical. It was all online. She just had to fill out these forms. She just had to learn about, I mean, it was almost, a little bit of anatomy, a little bit of
Excuse me.
kinesiology, but she really didn't have to do anything.
That's health, not PE, but okay.
Well, it was
I
a
mean,
PE class.
if
It,
it, I
it,
know, I was
it
going to
was,
say, yeah, I could do a health class. In fact, I used to love to do them because, I was doing meditation and yoga and things. So I would take the kids along for rides with that. Do a yoga class. And
mhm.
definitely that was health, health or PE. But because we talked about the aspects of what it did and things, but yeah, I guess you
Right.
could go both that way. Yeah.
So the access we've talked about,
Yeah.
you can do enrichment courses. And I brought that up earlier that you could do enrichment if somebody wanted to find out something more about something. You could always put them on there, but to have it as the main course,
Hmm. They're not referred.
I'm
There's no,
unless the student is actually okay, we talk about learning styles. Now, if
yes.
you were to put me in front of one of those classes, I would have a terrible time. I would be miserable doing something like that. Now, let me set this straight. I
Yeah.
did do MOOCs. I
MOOCs.
have done MOOCs, and I have learned tons from MOOCs. Difference is with a MOOC, I can go for 3 to 4 hours every week to 2 weeks.
I'm sorry, I'm ignorant. I may be ignorant. What a MOOC?
What is a MOOC?
What be
A MOOC
MOOC?
is a massive open online course.
Oh, that's so
So,
anachronistic or
yeah, so
anacronymistic.
thank you for bringing that up.
Yeah.
They are they have gained so much popularity because my
Huh.
mother came down with a form of dementia. And so I was doing research
Mhm.
and I did my blog. But while I was doing all of this, I wanted to learn as much as I could about dementia in this particular form. Anyway, so I went online because the Wicking Institute, University of Australia, Tasmania, they have this MOOC. And I think at the time there were 17,500 of us around the world who took it. And there were tests that you would take and pass through. And if you needed to do it for some kind of a licensure, you could get those certifications. But for me, it was just one of those self learning things and it was free. And the last time I looked, I think there were over 100,000 people signed up to take that one. And they do it maybe twice a year now.
Oh, wow.
So if you take a look, you can find these and they're fascinating. Well, that's a lot different than putting a kid down in front. And this is what they wanted us to do with our alternative program was the kids would be there for 6 hours a day and they wanted 5 of those hours to be in front of that computer working diligently on their
Yeah, no.
coursework. And there's something really wrong with that when before the students were doing they may have been doing packets, but the packets they were sitting down working on, or they were reading books, they were doing something. But there was also the interaction where we would sit with them and we could go over it with them.
Mhm.
We could modify it with them.
Yeah.
There was a lot more interaction. With these, everything is do you want to eat TV dinners for the rest of your life?
Really? Have
It's
you
pretty
ever?
much
You
what it is.
know,
And how much nutrition do you really get? They're high in sodium. There's so many, yeah, you get food, but is it really the best food for you?
yeah,
And is
it's
this
like
really how
that.
we want to teach our kids?
The difference between conceptualizing knowledge is opening up your head and pouring things in
Mhm.
versus like the fire to be lit. I can't remember the Greek philosopher said that, but it's not a vessel to be filled, but a fire to be lit. Knowledge and learning, and you don't learn things by just filling your brain with stuff, and that's what it does. It delivers to you stuff, and then you fit that stuff in the framework of taking tests, taking notes, remembering it for this long, and then after it's done, probably letting it go. Unless, of course, a fire's lit, in which case you're going, wow, I want more. That class is intriguing. And then you probably wouldn't take their next class wanting more from that same venue.
No.
You probably go a little deeper. Yeah.
You might want to dig going through some other resources, maybe through the library.
Yeah. Yeah. But that's, it's not going to really light anybody's fire. And that was the
So,
problem because that's my shtick. It's as a teacher, I looked for that. If fires weren't being lit, I started looking for things to throw out there to set on fire because it's my standpoint on teaching is if you're boring the students, you know, deliberately, it's bad. But if you're doing it, you shouldn't do it. You should shift gears at all costs. Even if you start talking about the weather or something, because learning is difficult, especially things you have no clue of or context in. And so to present it as something interesting, at least, is our obligation. And online stuff is not interesting. It's,
see, I can see it as a secondary source
yeah, the
that it
most.
could be used for students who might benefit for it. But to say this is the only way that our alternative students or our credit recovery students will learn, I think that that flies in the face of anybody's definition of equity in the first place.
Or alternative
Secondly,
ed in particular, specifically, really. It just flies in the
right.
face of alternative
And now here's something, and I'm going to link this article down below. Our dear friend Tara Garcia Mathewson
ed. Yep.
just published an article on how AI, it says that English language learners, people who are not native speakers, are usually called out for cheating on
No.
AI checks.
Oh,
You know, when
damn.
they submit to
Yes.
turnitin.com or any of the others,
Yes.
that this happens. And so because they automatically assume that it's either AI or that it's cheating. Now, she brings up
Mm.
she brings up an instructor at
Oh,
Johns Hopkins who had a student and the student hadn't received a grade. I think this is right.
yeah.
And the the instructor said, "Well, it says that 75% or so of your paper was AI generated." And the student said, "No, here are my notes, here are my outlines, here are the articles, da 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 that I went through." And the teacher thought, "Wow." And then later on, that same instructor was working with another foreign student on their paper, and they submitted, and the same thing happened. So it discounts
Yeah.
the work by second language learners, non-native speakers of English.
Well, it shows a bias in regards to like the Turing test.
Yeah,
Yeah.
right.
And so if it's a white student, you're thinking, oh, by all means, that's the human. But if it's a student that's not white, you're going, that's an artificial. You're going that human can't produce that.
No,
The
they found
artificial
that it's
must
second
produce.
language learners,
Yeah, but I'm
not
saying that
necessarily white.
okay, you're right. I'm saying generally speaking, second language learners, you're right.
Yeah.
They don't get that benefit of the doubt. We were talking about equity. I'm thinking more like color and race, but you're right. There are some like Russian speakers and
See, when I
things like
speak
that.
of equity, I mean all students. I'm
Yeah,
not looking at whether or not I'm
Right.
this kind of student over that kind of student. I'm
I'm
thinking
not either. I'm just
all
generally kind of.
students.
It was just a generalization, which I shouldn't be making. It's because general folks of color are on the other side of that. Well, you're a person of color. You couldn't. I'm not going to take your word for it per se. As if a white person says something, it's kind of like, oh yeah, of course you said that. It's just
Yeah.
a kind of a bias we have that I was
Well,
kind of
it's
noticing.
the
But you're
it's
right. It might have a lot to do with the Turing test anyway. It's just no, that can't be something that you've achieved. And it's like, yeah, it actually is something that I've achieved, regardless of what the AI may say about it.
right. And so some places have actually there are a couple that are now looking at how to get rid of that bias. What do they have to do in order to eliminate that? But turnitin.com is one of the ones that actually sees this.
Yeah, you have to wonder. It's
So,
just
and I
really
can't remember the
new,
names of the
fresh, and
others.
kind of complicated.
Mhm.
Well, just to note that you had written this organizational chart, an outline, and I had gone over it, and it was very good. I liked it a lot, and I thought to myself, is there anything I'd add or take away? I go, not really. I could kind of like look at this, tweak that, or tweak this, and then I told you that very thing, and you go, that was AI generated, and I thought maybe I should start looking into using AI because it's a darn good
AI,
list.
let's sum up where we are so far. So, there's a lack of personal interaction,
Yeah,
limited hands on experiential learning, which is not good for, I mean, a lot of our learners are kinesthetic. They need to get away from everything. They need to have things that calm them down, settle their minds a little bit because they come from all over. And so we need to be able to assess those because one size fits all doesn't work,
it's
obviously,
not the
because
best
if
way
they're
to learn,
alternative
anyways.
ed, they weren't making it for whatever reason in the mainstream classroom. Doesn't mean that they're
Yeah.
stupid, doesn't mean that they need remediation. They just have a harder time.
Yep.
Technical issues. There's equity with the technical issues because something might go awry.
You got to own a computer.
Mm.
Sometimes you got to own the internet. You got to like rent or have service. If
You have to
you're
have
off
access to all
site,
of that.
you got to have that. Yeah.
Sometimes during the winter, some people go to the libraries and use that internet. Sometimes they have to use those computers at the libraries, but they have wait lines sometimes there. During the pandemic, people were in the McDonald's parking lot using that Wi Fi. So, there are just so many different reasons, but where there's a will, there's a way. And if the students tell us, then we can work with them and we can figure out a solution. Self motivation and time management is not always something that our students have a good handle on
Yeah, we talked about that. The kid that thinks he has to work, or the employer that thinks the kid has to work for them. Yeah,
because their motivation is elsewhere.
yeah, they
Time
don't buy in.
management, sometimes kids do not always have good time management skills. Let's face it.
Not always.
I mean, I still struggle sometimes with time management, but
Me too. It's a
but
skill.
when yeah, so you
It's
have to
the
learn
thing I
how to
noticed is
do
that
that.
they'd be online with the screen, and then when I was doing the online, I looked for the facial change, not the screen, because you can tell when they click back onto something, their demeanor changes. I got pretty
Mm.
good at reading that, and then I go over and I'd see their hand click, and I go, yeah, and then I just lean down and say, just the work, please, not other windows. It's like,
The other thing is that, like with classroom, if you are in another part of the classroom, and let's say you're just working, you can always monitor your screen. You can see where the kids are in classroom.
yeah,
And so
there's that
you're
too.
able to see what they're up to. You can't really do that with any of these, with GradPoint, with Odysseyware, with
No.
Edgenuity, with Plato, whatever.
You can monitor the online computers that you got rolling with some software, but
And you also lose out on your school culture
we didn't
because
have
you
it.
don't have a community anymore.
Yeah, and then we'd
because
have this obligation, like he'd have to come 2 times per week to a half an hour
mhm.
check-in sort of, and then we'd try to like, I don't know, talk about something that was general to the school district and them and stuff. Anyway, and a lot of kids really resisted that, thinking, geez, man, it's only half an hour twice
Well,
a
I
week.
remember students having a really hard time with that.
Yeah.
And I
It's,
said, "Well, why are you having a terrible time?" "Well, because they want me to have stuff done by then." And I sort of side eyed and I said, "Are you kidding me? 2 days a week."
that's right. That would
So,
be one of the reasons I didn't make my deadlines and I don't want to hear
right. So there we go
about that.
back to the time management.
And the student
And
relationships with the teachers, because I didn't have that problem before I arrived there. The teachers were very, you know, reward and punishment and shame. They use shame. You should be this far. You should be doing better. You should this, you should that. It's like, well, yeah, they're an alternative kid. They should not be here, Clark. Uh, they would. I would say that, and they go, "What do you mean?" I go, "They're alternative kids. They shouldn't be doing a lot of things, and they do them really well." It's
mhm.
so, but yeah, it wasn't helpful.
Well, I remember I sent a couple of kids to you at that program. And one of them used to call me and say, "Can you help me with this?" And I said, "Well,
Really?
why are you coming to me? You're working with them." "Yeah, but they don't really help me." And I would say, "Well,
Oh,
come on in. Let's take a look. Let me see." And then, but you're going to have to explain to me what's going on with this because I had no idea how to do what they were doing. And so they were able
yeah.
to do that. We got some of it done, but some of it was just a lot of our students need hand holding. They need that point of contact. They need to have that relationship because online we don't have a relationship so much. They
Yeah,
need to
that would
have
be
that
it.
relationship that somebody is there for them and that they care and that they can just go to them. And maybe they just need to sit down and say, "Can I just sit here next to you while I do my work?"
I had kids like that even in the online. They would
Well,
come just talk to me, and I would let them because
they
it was
need to have a
important to
connection.
have that connection. Correct. The culture there was, we don't have time for connection. You should tell them to get back to work.
Well,
I fought this constantly.
whoever was your lead needed to get into a jar so you could shake it up a little bit.
No, she had like 3 or 4 years experience, so she knew everything there was to know apparently,
Oh, okay.
and she
See,
had
I'm still
deadlines.
learning.
So yeah,
I'm
me,
still
I was
learning.
like, but I knew that was important.
Yeah, we
So
got
the
to get rid
kids,
of know-it-alls.
yeah,
So,
it's not about the work so much as
because for alternative ed, we have to have adaptation to special needs. Now, if I
yeah,
have a second language learner, yes, there are some points in on these programs that will adapt to their language and they can learn that way. How are we working with them to integrate knowledge and skills so that they're also working on their English and academic skills? They could be learning, let's say that they're learning they let's say that they come from south of south of the states, Central or South America. They, in order for them to survive, and they're still at that wonderful time of their life where they can really pick up the language quickly
right,
through peer interactions, except most of their peers probably speak the same language that they do. And I know a lot of students who had a terrible time learning the language because they spoke almost exclusively in their native tongue.
yeah.
So how do we work with them on this and work with their ELL teachers in order to help get them into understanding more?
Stop that. First off, if you're using online learning platform, you don't. I
No,
mean, I don't see how I could coordinate the language, the content, and then with the language learning people, whoa, it would be like, I don't know how I'd make that transition. I know how I'd do it maybe in alternative ed with not the online platform, or
And how do
try to.
you adapt for special ed?
That's another thing too. I mean, not only is it not adaptable really to special ed kids are really good at hiding the fact that they're not getting the content. And so it's
Mm-hmm.
difficult to kind of get that too. They're kind of decent at maybe A, B, C, D'ing it, but generally, if they're special ed, they're missing key components for sure, and they can hide it.
So I'm going to go out on a limb here,
Yeah,
and I'm going to say, sure, it's cheaper. It's cheaper for a district to have a computerized system of learning than it is to
yeah.
hire teachers who know what they're doing.
It's uniform. You manage
It's
it.
uniform.
Yeah, yeah. Cheaper.
It's good for enrichment, but it lacks clarity. It lacks contact. It lacks context. It lacks
Yeah,
personalization. It lacks equity.
sure does. It's not equitable.
So my concern is that if districts are going this way, that teachers need to step back and say, look, we know what we're doing. In the state of Oregon, we are allowed to teach whatever we believe we are able to teach, as long as there are other teachers who are highly qualified within reach and context of the program or school that we're working in.
Yep, that's our job to
That
teach.
doesn't mean I'm going to be teaching Algebra 2 because I'm not comfortable with that. I'm really not. I did teach it. I did teach geometry. I did teach Algebra 1. I taught English. I taught the social sciences.
Mm-hmm.
I taught many of the natural sciences. I did not teach chemistry.
Yeah.
But
When it came to being highly qualified, when they evaluated me, I was highly qualified in everything but mathematics, foreign language, and hard science, physical science. So
mhm,
it's like, yeah, that makes sense.
right.
So
And I also taught foreign language. I taught
yeah, I can do that.
dramatics. I taught music. I taught
Yeah,
art. There were,
I can do that. But yeah,
but the thing is when, and they're worried about state testing. Well, the problem is that when I taught what I taught, all my students came out exceptional on the testing. They did incredibly well.
as mine did. I mean, they did well. They all got their proficiency. Yeah, we shot for that. We targeted that, and we got there.
So I
And
didn't
went
target
past it for the
anything.
most
I
part.
just wanted the kids to learn the material.
Yeah, and they went past it. I mean, I
Yeah.
wanted to make sure they were proficient. Here's your proficiency scale. They did it. Now let's go learn. You're right. I was just thinking while you're talking about the things you taught, and I thought about the things I taught. It's the fundamental question hit me: why, in an environment of teachers like us, would you want to just default to an online program?
It's about
Period.
control.
It's about a lot of things, but it's certainly not about teaching kids. It's
And it
about
has nothing to do with kids. It's about control.
it is. It's got to be, or it's about cost, like you said, because yeah, we're teachers. We know how to do it with two and amongst all those other kids. And this is just a PAP program. It's honestly, it's canned hash. It's got no salt or flavor to it
And
versus
it's a
a
lack of
chef.
respect for the students and their abilities. And it's
Yes,
also
yes,
punishment for students for not
yes.
doing, for not complying and conforming to what they demand.
And that's you're right. The overall arch is that it's like, well, we'll show them if they can't do it our way, you'll give them another way, and
Right.
yeah, it's like, geez,
Holy
yeah,
cow.
because it's not good stuff, and I don't even know if it's useful now, really. If you've got teachers,
Mm.
hey,
So, wrapping up, I'm going to say make sure that you hit that subscribe button for further episodes. We have some cool ones that are on the way. To make sure that you let us know what you think of this. Give us a review, give us a like, check out our YouTube channel. You can find us on LinkedIn, you can find us on Twitter, you can find us on Instagram. So be sure that you check us out. Be sure that you get involved in the conversation. Give us some feedback. We love it. And we will see you again next week. So Philip, thank you again.
Tony, it's been fun. Aloha. Good stuff.
Aloha. Have a wonderful week. Keep your eyes on the stars and build those relationships. Until then, bye-bye. Hey everybody, this is Tony. Thank you so much for watching the video. We've got more coming that go right along with this. So if you want to know what's next, go ahead, hit that subscribe button. Go ahead, hit that like button, because that helps with the algorithm, and that's what allows us to do this. So if you like what you see, share it, subscribe, and join us again when the next videos come. And we do have a catalog growing, so we hope to see more of you. Okay? Thank you.